I never thought a simple massage could turn into something that would shatter everything I believed in. But that night, as his hands moved across my skin, I felt something I shouldn't have. Something dangerous. I wanted to stop. God, I should have stopped, but the moment our eyes met, I knew there was no turning back. This is my confession, my darkest secret. I always believed in love, the kind that lasted through decades, through every storm life threw at you. That's what I thought I had with Daniel. We were together for 15 years, built a life that looked perfect from the outside. A beautiful home, 2 wonderful kids, and memories that painted the illusion of happiness. But illusions fade. Somewhere along the way, the laughter died down. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at me turned into something distant, something cold. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that love simply changes over time. That passion fades and companionship is enough. But late at night, as I lay beside him in bed, feeling the vast emptiness between us, I knew I was lying to myself. Loneliness crept in, settling deep into my bones. I tried to fill the void, going to the gym, taking up new hobbies, even trying to rekindle the romance. But Daniel was always too tired, too busy, or just not in the mood. I told myself he was just stressed from work, that it wasn't about me. But deep down I knew better. I knew when a man had stopped seeing his wife as a woman. That's when he entered my life. Ethan was my husband's best friend's son. He had practically grown up around us, though I never paid him much attention. But after moving back to town at 24, he had changed. No longer the awkward teenager who used to visit during summers. He was now a man. Confident, charming, with a body that carried the effortless strength of youth. He had his father's sharp jawline, his mother's piercing blue eyes, and a presence that made people turn when he walked into a room. When he started coming over more often, to help his dad with some work in our backyard, I barely noticed at first. Until one day he stayed longer than usual, helping me clean up after a family gathering. It was harmless at first. Just small talk, a few shared laughs. But then, there was a glance, a look that lingered just a second too long. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But that tiny ember of attention? It lit a spark inside me I hadn't felt in years. I should have walked away then. But I didn't. And that was my first mistake. I told myself it was harmless. Just casual conversations, fleeting glances, a little attention that I had been starved of for years. But deep inside, I knew something had shifted. The way Ethan looked at me wasn't just polite or friendly anymore. It was intense, lingering, filled with something unspoken. And I didn't stop him. At first, I convinced myself that I was imagining things. That I was overanalyzing the way he stood just a little too close when we talked. How his hand would brush against mine when he handed me something, or how his eyes would lock onto mine with a quiet intensity. But as the days passed, it became undeniable. One afternoon, while my husband was out of town for work, Ethan stopped by. He had been helping his father with some repairs in our backyard, but after his dad left, he stayed behind, offering to help me move some heavy furniture. It was innocent enough, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. But as we worked side by side, something hung in the air between us. Thick, electric, dangerous. I felt it when he reached over me to grab a book from the shelf, his chest brushing against my shoulder. I felt it when he laughed at something I said, his gaze dropping to my lips for just a second too long. And I felt it most when I caught him staring at me, really staring, like he was trying to figure out if I felt it too. And God help me, I did. The tension grew with every interaction. He started showing up more often, always finding a reason to stay a little longer, to talk a little more. My heart would pound when I saw him pull into the driveway, and I hated how much I looked forward to it. How much I craved it. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, I heard his voice behind me. "You shouldn't do everything alone, you know," Ethan said softly. I turned, and he was standing too close. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the way his jaw clenched as his eyes flickered over me. I forced a chuckle, trying to play it off. "I'm used to it." "That's the problem," he murmured. His voice was low, smooth, laced with something dangerous. My breath hitched. I should have stepped away. I should have shut it down. But I didn't. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment with Ethan. The way his hand had rested on my lower back for just a second too long when he passed me a dish. The way his fingers had brushed against mine when I handed him a towel. The way my body had reacted to his touch, how alive it made me feel. Guilt gnawed at me, but so did something else. A hunger. The next time Ethan came over, I told myself I'd keep my distance, that I wouldn't let things get out of hand. But as soon as he walked through the door, all my resolve melted away. Because now we weren't just tiptoeing around the tension. Now it was undeniable. And it was only a matter of time before one of us crossed the line. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. Ethan wasn't just a passing distraction anymore. He was in my thoughts constantly. I started noticing everything about him. The way his t-shirt clung to his broad chest when he worked in the yard, the way his jaw tensed when he was deep in thought, the way his lips parted slightly when he listened to me speak. I felt like a teenager again, craving attention, stealing glances, finding excuses to be in the same room as him. But this wasn't some innocent crush. This was something deeper, something more dangerous. And Ethan knew it too. It was a Sunday afternoon when everything changed. My husband was away for the weekend at a business conference, and I was home alone, reading in the living room when the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Ethan stood there, a playful smirk tugging at his lips, holding up a small bag. "I was grabbing coffee and thought you might want some," he said. I hesitated. Letting him in felt like inviting trouble. But I stepped aside anyway. "Thanks," I murmured, taking the cup from his hand. He walked in like he belonged there, like this was his home too. He sat on the couch, stretching his arms across the back of it, his long legs spreading slightly as he got comfortable. His confidence was intoxicating. I sat down on the opposite end, trying to maintain some distance. But it didn't matter. The space between us was thick with unspoken words, with all the things we hadn't admitted, but both knew were there. "Do you ever just feel stuck?" Ethan asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I turned to him, surprised by the shift in his tone. "What do you mean?" His eyes met mine, something dark flickering in them. "Like you're trapped in a life that doesn't feel like yours anymore?" The air left my lungs. He wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about me. I swallowed hard, staring down at my coffee cup. "Yeah," I whispered. "I do." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then slowly he reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over the back of my hand. It was barely a touch, but it sent a current through my entire body. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, stopped it before it went any further. But I didn't. Instead, I let him lace his fingers through mine, let him squeeze my hand just enough to let me know that he felt it too. The pull, the need, the craving we were both too afraid to say out loud. His thumb traced slow circles against my skin, and I shivered. "I think about you," Ethan murmured. My breath hitched. "Ethan." "I know I shouldn't," he said, his voice dropping lower. "But I can't help it. Neither could I." His hand left mine, moving to my jaw, tilting my face toward him. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. "You feel it too, don't you?" he whispered. I couldn't speak. Couldn't lie. I just nodded. And then he kissed me. It was soft at first, like he was testing the waters, giving me a chance to stop him. But I didn't. I couldn't. So when his lips pressed harder, when his hands gripped my waist and pulled me closer, I melted into him. It was reckless. It was wrong. But it felt so damn right. His hands slid up my back, his fingers digging into my skin as he pulled me against his chest. I gasped, and he took the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his tongue brushing against mine in a way that made my entire body ignite. I clung to him, nails digging into his shoulders, body molding to his like I had been waiting for this moment my whole life. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting together. "We can't," I whispered, but even I didn't believe my own words. Ethan's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "But we already have." And he was right. There was no undoing this. No taking it back. I was past the point of return. And deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. I told myself that was it, that I wouldn't let it happen again. But I was lying. Days passed and Ethan didn't text. He didn't call. I should have been relieved, should have used the silence as a way to put distance between us. But instead it drove me insane. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was him. Every time I heard a car door slam outside, my heart pounded, thinking he had come back. Then on Friday evening he did. I was in the kitchen pouring a glass of wine when I heard the knock at the door. My husband was away again, another weekend business trip, leaving me alone with my thoughts, alone with my mistakes. I opened the door, and there he was. Ethan. He didn't speak, didn't hesitate. He just walked in, shutting the door behind him. His eyes were darker than I'd ever seen them, filled with something raw, something dangerous. "I can't stop thinking about you," he murmured. I exhaled shakily, setting my glass down on the counter. "Ethan, But I didn't get to finish. His hands were on me, his lips crashing against mine before I could say another word. And I let him. I let him lift me onto the kitchen counter, let his hands roam down my back, pulling me against him. It wasn't sweet this time. It wasn't careful. It was desperate, hungry, like he had been holding back just as much as I had. His fingers tangled in my hair as he kissed me harder, and I moaned against his lips, any last shred of resistance dissolving into nothing. I wanted him. More than that, I needed him. The world outside of us didn't exist anymore. The only thing that mattered was the way his body felt against mine, the way his touch sent fire through my veins. Then, a sound. The front door. We froze. Panic shot through me as I shoved Ethan away, my heart slamming against my ribs. No. No, no, no. This wasn't happening. Footsteps echoed down the hall. I barely had time to fix my shirt before my husband's voice cut through the silence. Honey. I turned just as Daniel stepped into the kitchen, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Ethan standing too close, too tense. What's going on? Daniel asked, his voice sharp. I forced a smile, my hands trembling. Ethan just stopped by to help me with something. Ethan, to his credit, stayed calm. Yeah, she needed help with the sink. Daniel's gaze flickered between us, his jaw clenching. He wasn't stupid. He could feel it. Something was off. I held my breath, waiting for him to say something, waiting for him to call me out. But after what felt like an eternity, he just nodded stiffly. Well, thanks for helping, Daniel said, his tone unreadable. But I've got it from here. It wasn't a suggestion. Ethan hesitated, his gaze lingering on me before he finally nodded. Of course. And just like that, he walked out the door, leaving me to face the fallout. That night I could barely sleep. I kept replaying the moment over and over, trying to convince myself that Daniel hadn't seen anything, that he had believed my lie. But deep down I knew better. The next morning, I woke up to silence. Daniel was gone. No note, no text, just gone. My stomach twisted as I checked my phone, but there was nothing from him. Or from Ethan. I tried to push through the day like everything was normal, but the weight of it all was suffocating. I had crossed a line, there was no denying it now. And the worst part, I didn't even regret it. That evening, as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection, my phone finally buzzed. A message from Ethan. Come outside. My heart pounded as I made my way to the front door, hesitating for only a moment before stepping onto the porch. Ethan was leaning against his car, arms crossed, watching me with that same unreadable expression. You okay? He asked softly. I let out a breath. I don't know. He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. Did he say anything? No. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He knows, doesn't he? I swallowed hard, wrapping my arms around myself. I think so. Ethan took a step closer, his fingers brushing against my arm. Tell me what you want, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And that was the problem. Because I didn't know anymore. I wanted him, I couldn't deny that. But I also knew the weight of what we had done, the destruction it could cause. I looked up at him, my chest tightening. This can't happen again. His expression didn't change. Then why are you still here? I had no answer. The silence stretched between us before Ethan finally nodded, stepping back. If that's what you want. And then he got in his car. And drove away. I stood there, watching his taillights disappear into the night, feeling an ache settle deep in my chest. I should have felt relieved. But all I felt was loss. The house felt different after that night. The walls seemed colder, the silence heavier. My husband hadn't said a word about Ethan, but I knew, he felt it. There was a shift in the way he looked at me, in the way he moved around the house, distant, like he was pulling away without saying why. Maybe he was waiting for me to confess. Maybe he was testing how far I would let the lie stretch before it snapped. I spent the next few days walking on eggshells, waiting for the confrontation that never came. But it wasn't peace. It was punishment. The not knowing, the suffocating guilt, the constant replay of what I had done. And worst of all, the way I still thought about Ethan. I missed him. It was pathetic, I knew that. But no matter how hard I tried to push him from my mind, I couldn't. My body still remembered the way he felt, my skin still burned from his touch. I hated myself for it. And then, just as I started to convince myself that maybe I could bury it, that I could pretend like nothing happened, Ethan came back. I was in the grocery store, mindlessly staring at a row of cereal boxes when I felt it. That pull. I turned, and there he was. Ethan. His eyes locked onto mine from across the aisle, his expression unreadable. He didn't move at first, like he was waiting to see what I'd do. I should have looked away. I should have walked out of that store and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I met him halfway. Neither of us spoke at first. We just stood there, the weight of everything between us pressing down like an invisible force. Then, finally, he broke the silence. "You look tired," he said softly. I let out a shaky breath. "I haven't been sleeping much." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Me neither." The air was thick, charged with everything we weren't saying. I swallowed hard. This was a mistake. His jaw clenched. "Was it?" I nodded, even though the words felt like a lie. "It was." Ethan studied me for a long moment, then took a slow step closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that I felt the heat of him. "Then why are you still looking at me like that?" he murmured. My throat tightened. "Ethan." He reached out, just barely brushing his fingers against my wrist, and I shuddered. God, I was weak. "Say the word," he said. "Tell me to leave, and I will." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because I couldn't say it. I didn't want him to leave. I hated myself for it, but I still wanted him. And that was the moment I knew I had lost control. Because when my husband pulled into the driveway later that night, I was standing in the kitchen, staring at my phone, waiting for Ethan to text me. And I knew deep down that it wasn't over. Not even close. Guilt is a funny thing. It doesn't hit all at once. It seeps in slowly, wrapping around you like a suffocating fog. Some nights it was unbearable. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to my husband's steady breathing beside me, wondering how I had let myself get here. I had a choice that night. I could have walked away. I could have let Ethan go. But I didn't. The texts continued, short, careful messages, never too obvious. A thinking about you here, a miss you there. Each one was a dangerous thread, pulling me deeper into something I should have escaped from. And then one day my husband finally spoke. It was over dinner. The clinking of silverware against our plates was the only sound between us, the air thick with everything unspoken. And then, "Is there something you want to tell me?" I froze, my fork halfway to my lips. My heart slammed against my ribs. I forced a neutral expression. "What do you mean?" Daniel set his fork down, folding his hands in front of him. His eyes, calm, too calm, locked onto mine. "I think you know exactly what I mean." A cold sweat broke out over my skin. This was it. He knew. I swallowed hard. My mind raced with a dozen possible lies, ways to spin the truth, to salvage what little I had left. But then I saw the look in his eyes. He wasn't asking because he suspected. He was asking because he knew. And suddenly I was exhausted. Exhausted from the lies, from the guilt, from the weight of carrying something I wasn't sure I even wanted anymore. I set my fork down, my hands trembling slightly. I could feel the words burning at the back of my throat, desperate to be released. But I couldn't say them, because saying them meant it was real. Saying them meant I had to face the consequences. So instead, I looked down at my plate and whispered, "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel exhaled sharply, a sound that was almost a laugh, but not quite. More like disappointment. He pushed back from the table, standing slowly. "All right," he murmured. "I guess that's my answer." And then, without another word, he walked away. I sat there, staring at the empty chair across from me, my heart pounding. I had just made the worst mistake of all. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just losing my husband. I had already lost myself. What would you have done in my place? Should I have confessed or held on to my secret? Let me know in the comments below. If you love gripping, real-life stories of love, betrayal, and forbidden desires, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Trust me, the next story? It's even more shocking than this one.